In the year 65 AD, a man sat in a warm bath and opened his veins. He had been ordered to die by the emperor he once tutored. The man was 68 years old. He was one of the wealthiest individuals in the Roman Empire. He owned multiple villas, vast estates in Egypt, and enough land to make modern billionaires pause. His name was Lucius Seneca, and he had spent the last 30 years of his life writing, in precise, urgent prose, about why none of it mattered. You have probably had this feeling. Not the bath, not the emperor, but the other part. The part where you work harder than you ever have. Where the number in your account grows, or the title changes, or the house gets bigger, and something in you stays exactly the same. Maybe gets quieter. Maybe gets more hollow. You were told that discomfort is a problem money solves. That security is the goal, and wealth is security, and therefore wealth is peace. So you kept going. Most people do. But there is a man, dead 2,000 years, who understood this trap more completely than almost anyone who has ever lived. Not because he avoided it, but because he walked straight into it. All the way to the bottom. And wrote about what he found there. Seneca was born around 4 BC in Córdoba in what is now Spain. His father was a wealthy Roman knight, educated, ambitious, the kind of man who sent his son to Rome to study rhetoric and philosophy. Young Seneca was brilliant and frail, prone to illness and obsessed with ideas. He studied under Stoic teachers. He nearly died of tuberculosis in his 30s and spent years in Egypt recovering, years he later described as among the most clarifying of his life. He returned to Rome and entered politics. He was exiled to Corsica for 8 years on charges that were almost certainly fabricated. And then, improbably, he was recalled to Rome to tutor the boy who would become the Emperor Nero. Here is the detail that matters. Seneca spent those years at the center of the most powerful court in the world. He advised an emperor. He accumulated extraordinary wealth, through inheritance, through patronage, through the kind of proximity to power that generates money like a tide generates water. By his 50s he was worth the equivalent of hundreds of millions. And the entire time he was writing letters and essays about the emptiness of accumulation. His critics called him a hypocrite. They still do. But Seneca had a different answer. He wasn't arguing that money was evil. He was arguing something harder to hear, that money is morally neutral, that the problem is never what you have, but what has you. The first idea, wealth is a borrowed thing. Seneca wrote in his letters to Lucilius, a series of private letters to a friend, written in the final years of his life, that fortune does not change us. It unmasks us. He meant this precisely. When wealth arrives, it doesn't install new values into a person. It amplifies whatever was already there. Give a frightened man money and he becomes more frightened. Give a generous man money and he becomes more generous. The money reveals the shape of the soul that was already present. Think about someone you know who received a sudden windfall, an inheritance, a business success, a promotion that doubled their income. Did they change? Or did they become more intensely themselves? Seneca put it this way, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor. The poverty he was describing has nothing to do with your bank statement. The second idea, wanting more is a disease with no cure inside itself. This is where Seneca gets uncomfortable to read. He wrote extensively about what he called cupidity, a kind of restless craving, an appetite that grows as you feed it. It is the feeling you know after you get the thing you wanted and find the wanting simply migrate somewhere else. The new car, the new job, the new apartment. Each one briefly satisfying, each one quietly replaced by the next target. Modern psychology has a name for this, the hedonic treadmill. You run and stay in the same place. But Seneca framed it differently. He didn't call it a treadmill. He called it a form of slavery. In letters to Lucilius he wrote, "Show me a man who isn't a slave. One is a slave to lust, another to greed, another to ambition. The chains aren't visible. That's what makes them so effective. If you have spent years doing work that slowly bores you, in pursuit of a number that keeps moving, to afford a life you barely have time to live, Seneca is not judging you. He is describing himself. That is what makes it worth listening to. The third idea, the examined relationship with wealth. Here is where Seneca parts company with a simple rejection of money. He never said, give it all away, live in poverty, renounce comfort. He said, know what you are doing. He was specific about this. Owning things is not the problem. Being owned by them is. He described the Stoic ideal not as someone who has nothing, but as someone who could, if necessary, lose everything, and remain themselves. He practiced this. He wrote in his letters about living simply for stretches of time, eating plainly, wearing rough clothes, not to perform poverty but to remind himself that he did not need what he had. He called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Deliberately imagining loss before it arrives, not to become morbid, but to break the illusion that comfort is permanent, that what you have is what you are. But here is what most people miss about Seneca, and what makes him genuinely different from every other philosopher of wealth. He never resolved the contradiction in himself. He never became the thing he described. He knew it. He wrote about it openly. He told Lucilius that he was not writing to him as a sage, but as a patient describing the disease from inside it. That honesty is the point. Most wisdom traditions ask you to admire the teacher who has already arrived. Seneca asks you to sit with a man who is still walking, who has seen the destination clearly enough to describe it, and who has not yet reached it. Maybe never will. There is something in that which feels more true to how life actually works. Think of it this way. You know what a good night's sleep does for you. You know what too much screen time costs you. You know that the anxiety about your finances is, at a certain level, disproportionate to the actual threat. You know these things, and you still scroll, still lie awake, still chase the number. Knowing is not the same as being transformed. But knowing clearly and returning to it and letting it embarrass you into small corrections, that is what Seneca was doing in those letters. Writing himself toward something he hadn't reached. The wealth he had was real. The insight he had was real. Both existed at the same time. He did not pretend otherwise. And somehow that makes the insight more useful, not less. The Stoic relationship with money is not about emptying your hands. It is about knowing what you're holding, and why. It is about refusing to let the thing you own become the thing that measures you. Seneca sat in the most powerful court in the world, surrounded by gold and marble, writing, "The soul should know where it has placed its good. Not where fortune placed it. Not where society placed it. Where you placed it." He died without completing the escape he had written about. The bath, the open veins, the emperor's soldiers waiting outside. Accounts say the blood came slowly, his body was too old, too cold. He asked for a cup of poison. That too was slow. He died by suffocation finally in the steam. It is not a triumphant ending, but there is something in the way he faced it. No panic recorded. No final plea. A philosopher who had spent decades rehearsing the impermanence of everything he had, and found at the end that the rehearsal had been worth something after all. You will not be ordered to die by an emperor, but you will one day be asked to let go of something you built your identity around. Money. Status. A version of yourself that no longer fits. Seneca's question, the one he never stopped asking, is still waiting for an answer. Where have you placed your good?